In last week's video, we saw 3 pawns sacrificed in the opening, but you know what? That's nothing, because if you ever tried sacrificing your queen right out of the opening, because that's what we're going to see in this week's game. Welcome to the Raburn Series Premiere League Game of the Week number 3. Every week I look at the best game out of all of the games that have been played in our awesome league. Make sure link is in the description to join our Discord, because that is where people nominate the game that will be chosen. So make sure to check that out. Before we get into our main featured game for this week, I also wanted to give an honorable mention because this move that Old Takes Exposed of RCR played, this was a really nice move right here. Let's see if you can find it. Well, there's a nice tactic that is a queen sacrifice. And guess what? Like I said, this is just one of the queen sacrifices that we're going to see today. Because after king takes back, knight c4 wins the queen back right away, with the nice fork hitting the king and the queen winning it back, and ending with black being up in exchange and a nice pass to a-pawn that's going to be basically impossible to stop. This one was another board 1 matchup between Andrew Sko of UIUC. You might have noticed this isn't the same board 1 as UIUC had in their first week, and that's because different players can play each week because there are some extra subs. So this week, Andrew Sko had the honor of being on board 1, while Mattugas of KAN was playing with the black pieces. This game starts out as a Taimanov Sicilian, but as I said before, it's going to quickly turn into something very crazy. Because this knight b5 move, it kicks the queen all the way back to b8, where it seems like a silly place for your queen. After bishop e3, a6, black's idea is, okay, you might have forced my queen back, but now I'm going to force your knight back. Except, does white move back the knight? No way. Bishop b6 is a crazy move. The bishop just slides in there. Black has made all of these dark squared weaknesses because of all the pawns on the light squares. They've left their dark squares weak. So white's trying to take advantage of that by just immediately planting this bishop on b6, giving up this knight on b5. But the point is that when the other knight takes back, knight c7 is seemingly an unstoppable threat. And knight c7 is going to go there, it's going to force black's king to move, and you can pick up the rook in the corner to get some of your material back. So how can black stop white from playing knight c7? Well, here was how black did it. Black went bishop b4 check. White responds with c3, and it seems like black's just made things worse for themselves because now their bishop is also hanging. But the bishop slides back to a5, lending some support to c7, so that after knight c7, black sacrifices the queen. Queen takes c7. Black has given up the queen. Already just an unbelievable opening. It's only move 12 in this game. Then after queen g4, we can see black has all 3 of those minor pieces. They're very nicely lined up on the c file so that we can see them all at once. But white has this queen on g4. Immediately, white's trying to cause some havoc in black's position by just bringing out the queen, attacking that pawn, convincing black to move their king over to keep that pawn defended. Now we're going to have both sides just start to develop and pretend like this has been a normal game so far. Another cool thing is that this queen sacrifice out of the opening that we saw in this game has actually been seen in a number of games between strong players before. Black plays h5, just trying to gain some space on that side of the board, maybe hinting at knight g4, which is why white plays h3. Now black going to develop. White tries to play e5, hoping for some opening of the f-file towards black's king, but black just plays knight d5, not opening anything. White's next move might be a bit inaccurate because the king on h1, it turns out to not be the best placed, but you can understand that white really wanted to get the king off of this diagonal where the bishop could potentially be going sometime soon. After king g7, black's bringing out their king, opening up this rook to come into the game, and white wants to bring out their a1 rook. But right now the problem is if you move that rook, you're going to drop your a2 pawn. That's why white started with a4, defending the pawn. Now black counters with a pawn move on the other side of the board, h4, gaining control of that g3 square. And after rook d1, can you find an interesting plan for black? Okay, black is using this whole idea. This whole idea of putting the pawn on h4 is, again, to control this g3 square. So black plays the crazy move at knight back to e7. It looks like they just hung a piece. You can take d6, fork the bishop and the knight. But now comes black's idea. Knight f5, trying to bring that knight into g3 in order to fork white's king, rook, and queen. How can you stop this as white? Turns out You don't have to stop it. You could try to save your queen, but now we have the second queen sacrifice of the game. Unbelievable. Pawn takes c7, giving up the queen once black goes knight g3 and takes the queen. And what on earth is the material balance right now? Well, let's see. Well, actually, let's wait and see that white's going to take this knight first. So now if we count the material, we have basically black has an extra knight. So black's managed to come ahead an extra piece, but white has 7 pawns versus black's 5. So right now white has 2 pawns for the knight, but the pawn on c7 is quite the pawn. I mean, this one's about to promote. Right now, black has all of their pieces controlling it, but maybe one day in the future that pawn could help. And actually, I want to go back a move because this move is actually a bit of a mistake from white. It would have been better to capture the bishop instead, because by capturing the bishop, after the knight moves to safety and our rook moves over, we've established a rook on the 7th rank where it's extremely powerful, and we have ideas like bishop takes c6 to get rid of that knight, and then maybe put the rook on d8 where you can try to help get the pawn to promote. So this would have been another plan that was probably a bit better for white, but I mean, what's happening in the game? This position is still utter chaos with a knight versus some of the craziest passed pawns you've ever seen. The bishop drops back because it was hanging, and now what would your plan be for white? Well, we have all these extra pawns. Let's use them. b4, b5. This is where black makes their most significant mistake of the game. Can you find what a better move would have been for black? So in the game, they played knight a5. And the problem with this move is after b6, white has established these incredibly strong pawns, and black's knight on a5 is starting to feel a bit out of the game on the edge of the board over there. Instead, probably the best way for black to play would have been to just give the piece back. That's something you can do when you're ahead material. Just give the piece back. You allow them to capture, and yes, material is now even, but black has a big advantage in this endgame because of how loose white's structure is. The pawn on a4 is isolated. Pawn on c3 is isolated. So black would have a really good time in this endgame. Instead, white is able to prove the power of these pawns as they start to push. Rook comes up. Now black tries to, jump all around like this crazy knight, trying to find somewhere useful for it. After knight e4 attacking the pawn, white just calmly defends it. Rook a8. Now white activates the bishop. f5 trying to secure the knight. Now white starts to find the winning plan. They start by trading off this powerful knight now that it's centralized, but it took so many moves to bring the knight there, right? So when black put their knight on the side of the board, that was the problem. They were able to get it to a good square, but then it just got captured after having to move a whole bunch of times. And then white plays rook d1, putting the rook on the open file. And notice this pawn actually stops black from ever challenging this control of the only open file on the board, which is pretty funny. So black goes back, bishop c6, trying to prevent the rook from ever landing on d7. But what is the winning plan? How can white win this game? Turns out, all you need to do is get rid of this pawn. Because imagine if you could get rid of this pawn, you would be able to push here and push here. And it looks really difficult. How on earth are you going to get to that pawn? Well, it turns out you can play rook d6 and then sack right there. And black didn't have much else they could do because this pawn was hanging. And if you tried to play a move like bishop d5, the bishop can just be kicked out by c4. So without any good way to defend, black tried to bring in the king, but that allows white's idea. They sack another sacrifice. There's been 2 queen sacrifices this game, now a rook sacrifice, and these pawns are just too strong. I mean, you're gonna get a queen. The rook moves over, queen, queen, again. So there have been 2 queen sacrifices, 2 promoted queens, and now white's up a queen. It only took a few more moves for them to be able to finish the game off with a checkmate. And there we go. An absolutely ridiculous game, well played by Andrew of the UIUC team. If you enjoyed this video and enjoyed these games, because I certainly did with all of the craziness, with so many queen sacrifice stuffed into just 2 little games. If you enjoyed them, I'd appreciate if you like and subscribe to this channel.